His coffin exploded. His body bloated, blackened and reeking, leaked fluids through the seams. Dogs licked the royal remains off the church floor. Courtiers fainted from the smell. This was not a peaceful passing. This was decay, public, grotesque, and unstoppable. And yet, this man was once England's most powerful king. This is the story of Henry VIII's death, not the official version carved in stone or painted in royal portraiture, but the real one. The one that reeks of rot and screams in fevered whispers from the dark corners of his final chamber. A death so repulsive, so humiliating, that even the people who served him in life refused to speak of it after. Because how does a man who ruled like a god, who executed queens, defied popes, and reshaped a nation with his will alone, die like this? Alone, swollen, and rotting from the inside out. His subjects once bowed in awe, his enemies once trembled in fear. But in the end, even those closest to him, those paid to praise him, covered their faces and recoiled at his scent. A scent that filled the hallways before his footsteps ever arrived. A warning, a curse, a symbol of power gone putrid. And so we ask, what went wrong? How did the Golden Prince of England become a monster of flesh and fear? To answer that we have to go back, before the ulcers, before the madness, before the stench of death. We have to return to the beginning, to the boy who would become a king, and to the crown that would become his curse. He was not born to be king. Henry Tudor was the second son, an afterthought in the shadow of his elder brother, Arthur. While Arthur was trained in statecraft and diplomacy, Henry was raised for the church. But fate, cruel and sudden, had other plans. Arthur died at 15, and just like that, the spare became the heir. At 17, Henry VIII ascended the throne, and the world could not look away. He was tall, athletic, golden-haired and broad-chested. His skin glowed with health. His smile charmed everyone from peasant girls to foreign ambassadors. One Venetian envoy wrote that Henry possessed an angelic countenance and a body superior in beauty to any other Christian prince. He wasn't just handsome. He was magnificent. He was majesty incarnate, and he knew it. He danced at court balls. He jousted with the finest knights in Europe. He played the lute, wrote poetry in Latin, quoted philosophy and debated theology with bishops. He wasn't a king. He was a symbol of England's glory, youth, and divine favor. This was the Henry no one remembers, the glowing Renaissance prince, draped in silk, armor glinting in the sun, adored by his people, feared by his enemies, and admired across the continent. He had inherited a fragile dynasty, still bleeding from civil war, but with Henry at its head it looked invincible. The people sang his name. The nobles pledged their loyalty. The church praised him as God's chosen monarch. For a moment in history it felt as though nothing could touch him. But that was the illusion, because beneath the gold and glory, time was sharpening its blade, and soon the prince would bleed. January 1536, Greenwich Palace. A jousting tournament, the king's favorite sport. The crowd roared, trumpets blared, and Henry VIII, now 44 but still proud, charged onto the field atop a massive war horse clad in gleaming armor. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The horse collapsed mid-charge. Henry was thrown violently to the ground. The full weight of the armored beast came crashing down on his right leg. He lay there, unconscious, for 2 hours. Panic, swept the court. Whispers of the king's death rippled across England. He survived, but something inside him didn't. The wound to his leg never healed. It became a chronic ulcerated sore, one that festered and oozed. The pain was constant, and so was the smell. The once sparkling king now carried a stench that preceded him by rooms. Courtiers learned to mask their horror with perfume-soaked cloths. No one dared complain, not if they wanted to keep their heads. The injury ended his athletic life. No more jousts, no more long walks in the garden. Henry grew sedentary, and with inactivity came weight, tons of it. His 32-inch waist ballooned to over 50 inches. His body swelled past 400 pounds. Palaces had to be remodeled to fit him through the doors. A pulley system was built just to move him from room to room. But worse than the leg, worse than the fat, was the change in his mind. Some historians believe the head trauma triggered long-term damage. What began as a sharp temper transformed into full-blown paranoia. Rage, delusions, sudden executions. Old friends became traitors, loyal subjects became enemies, and anyone who questioned him vanished. This was not just a physical fall. It was the beginning of the king's unraveling from the inside out, and the deeper he decayed, the more dangerous he became. Henry VIII didn't just rule. He devoured. And nowhere was that more visible than in his marriages. 6 wives, 6 stories of ambition, betrayal, and blood, and not one ended in happiness. His first queen, Catherine of Aragon, served him faithfully for over 2 decades. But when she failed to produce a male heir, he cast her aside, exiled her, stripped her of her title, and tore the kingdom apart just to rid himself of her. The Pope refused to annul the marriage, so Henry severed England from Rome. He created his own church, not for God, but for divorce. Then came Anne Boleyn. She wasn't just another mistress. She was fire, sharp, political, ambitious. And when she couldn't deliver a son either, Henry turned on her. He accused her of adultery, incest, and treason, fabricated charges. She was beheaded in 1536. Her ghost, they say, never left him. Jane Seymour followed. She gave him what no one else could, a son, Edward. And then she died. Complications from childbirth. The only wife he buried with dignity, Anne of Cleves, rejected on sight, marriage annulled. Catherine Howard, just 19, young, vibrant, accused of cheating, beheaded like Anne. And finally Catherine Parr, the survivor, more nurse than wife. She watched the man die piece by piece. But it wasn't just their deaths that haunted him. As his ulcers deepened and his mind deteriorated, Henry began seeing things. In the dark of his room he whispered names: Anne, Jane, Thomas More. He spoke to shadows. He screamed at invisible figures. At night, the king who had silenced so many now couldn't silence the ghosts in his own mind. The court tiptoed around him. One wrong glance, one misunderstood word, and heads would roll. This wasn't power anymore. It was fear. And behind his bloodshot eyes, the king was slipping into something darker than madness. He was rotting, not just in body, but in soul. By now Henry's body was no longer royal. It was a battlefield. And he was losing. His legs were swollen with pus-filled ulcers. The skin around the wounds had turned black, peeling away in layers. Bone was visible through the flesh. The stench was unbearable, sour, sickly, rotting. It clung to the walls. It followed him like a curse. Attendants fainted, nobles covered their faces, but none dared speak of it. Treason laws made sure of that. He could no longer walk on his own. A pulley system had to lift him out of bed. His armor was remade to fit his grotesque proportions. The throne room doors were widened. His meals, 5,000 to 6,000 calories of red meat and beer, were wheeled in on golden trays. But even food became punishment. His massive size pressed down on failing organs. His breathing grew ragged, his face bloated and pale. Treatments only made it worse. Physicians, desperate to appease him, burned his ulcers with red-hot irons. They applied mercury and arsenic. They bled him with knives. They smeared him with strange concoctions. Boiled onions, crushed pearls, even powdered human skull. Nothing worked. Everything festered. He screamed in pain, roared in rage, then fell into long, vacant silences. For hours he'd sit motionless, eyes open but empty. Some thought he was praying. Others thought he was already halfway to death. At night, palace corridors echoed with his cries. The king, once the embodiment of power, was now a living corpse. A man trapped inside his own failing body. The smell became a warning. When it reached 3 rooms ahead, the court knew he was coming. Windows were flung open even in midwinter. Courtiers dabbed perfume under their noses, and still none dared look away, because beneath the rot was still the king. A king no one could heal, a king no one could confront, and a king who, despite everything, still ruled from a throne soaked in fear and blood. January 1547. Winter howled outside Whitehall Palace. Inside, death sat beside the king. Henry could no longer speak. His body had swollen beyond recognition. His legs, blackened with gangrene, emitted a stink so vile that even priests hesitated to enter the room. The man who once commanded Europe's attention now needed teams of servants just to be turned in bed. No one dared say it aloud, but everyone knew the king was dying. And yet, by law, to predict the monarch's death was treason. So physicians lied. Courtiers smiled. The game of pretending continued, even as the royal flesh softened, even as his skin cracked and seeped through the sheets. On January 27th, Henry asked for Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. He couldn't speak anymore, but when Cranmer asked if he died a Christian, Henry squeezed his hand, his last conscious act. By morning, the king was gone. But the horror didn't end there. As his corpse lay in the chapel, bloated from internal gases and poorly embalmed, his coffin began to leak. Putrid fluid pooled beneath it, royal rot seeping through the wood. And in the quiet of the night, a stray dog wandered in. It lapped at the sickly liquid beneath the coffin. No one stopped it. The scene was so grotesque, so symbolic, that chroniclers could hardly believe it. But they wrote it anyway. The mighty king, licked by a dog in death. For a man who built his image on power, glory, and divine favor, there could be no greater humiliation. This was not just a death. It was an unmasking. The man who had killed wives and shattered a religion had become a leaking corpse. The man who could silence any voice was now food for vermin. And in that moment, bloated, broken, leaking into the floorboards, Henry. Fagin became something else entirely. Not a monarch, not a god, just flesh and rot, and history's darkest reminder. That power cannot protect you from decay. History remembers his crown, his wives, his war with the Pope. But history forgets. What became of the man beneath the robe? Henry VIII wasn't just feared, he was worshipped. He rewrote the laws of God. He executed queens with the flick of a hand. He silenced dissent, shaped nations, and crowned himself head of a religion. But in the end, he couldn't conquer his own flesh. His portraits show a man of towering power. Broad shoulders, defiant eyes, hands planted firmly on hips. Unmovable, immortal, but the truth lay in the blood-soaked sheets, the ulcers that bled through bandages, the swollen corpse that ruptured its own coffin. This wasn't just a physical death. It was a symbolic one, because the decay wasn't limited to his body. It spread through his court, where fear replaced love, through his nation, where paranoia became law, and through his soul, where the ghosts of the dead whispered his name back to him. In his desperate quest for a son, he left behind a sickly boy who died young, and 2 daughters born of the very wives he condemned. It was Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, who would lead England into its golden age, the child of the queen he beheaded. That was Henry's legacy. And so we are left with this: even kings rot, even gods fall, even the most powerful men in history are just flesh and fear and bone. No title can stop the clock, no crown can silence the body, and no power, no matter how absolute, can rewrite the laws of decay. Henry VIII did not die with glory. He died with a stench, and a silence that screamed louder than any sword. A final lesson from the king who had everything except mercy.